All right, welcome to the show. It's my last day in the bunker for a little bit, and there is much to discuss. And this first story I'm going to talk about, there's sort of some risk to even talking about this story because the issue of Donald Trump and Russia has become so weaponized and so distorted and so partisan and toxic and tribal. It's become so disconnected from the actual facts that we know that there's a risk to even bringing this issue up again. But there is news that continues to fill out the story and our understanding of what took place before and during the Trump administration. And we learned some important things over the weekend about coordination between the Trump 2016 campaign and Russian intelligence. And since we've covered the story all along, it would be weird if I didn't tell you that there is new information. And there are some in my audience I know who refer to the story as Russiagate and refer to me as a Russiagator conspiracy hoax, whatever the terms now are on the story. But my core audience, who has been with us, at least back to 2017, knows that my position on Trump Russia was there will be no personal collusion found between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin at a personal level. There's not going to be any smoking gun video of Trump and Putin planning anything with regard to Donald Trump's candidacy, but it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck and it walks like a duck. Something approximating a duck is probably there. And indeed, we had more than a dozen indictments in the Mueller probe. There was communication and coordination between Trump and Russia, including through WikiLeaks as an intermediary. Paul Manafort in touch with Russians regarding polling and the campaign and on and on. It was never going to remove Donald Trump. Go back to my videos from April of 2017 where I made it clear Trump was never going to be charged or end up in prison as a result of whatever it was he did or didn't do with Vladimir Putin, because I don't want to say no one believed, but our show was not saying they will be caught having done anything, but it was likely all along a combination of Trump being sort of a useful idiot, not even realizing how his mere candidacy, his mere presidency, helps Russia's goal of destabilizing Western democracies for their gain. And some of the people around Trump were actually in touch with Russians and coordinating. So, okay, there's a new report, and this is a Treasury Department report, which now quietly in 2021, years after the entire fiasco, with Trump already gone, confirms that Donald Trump's 2016 campaign was sharing information with a Russian intelligence officer. Full stop. That's the story. During the 2016 election, Russian and Ukrainian political consultant Konstantin Kilimnik, we've mentioned this name before, was providing Russia with so-called sensitive information on polling and Trump campaign strategy. Kilimnik, quote, sought to promote the narrative that Ukraine, not Russia, had interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. In 2018, Kilimnik was indicted on obstruction of justice charges for his unregistered lobbying work related to Ukraine. But this same Treasury report now spells out that Kilimnik had been coordinating with Donald Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, during the 2016 election. The Treasury report refers to Kilimnik as a Russian intelligence officer. Donald Trump's campaign manager, campaign chairman for a period of time, was coordinating with a man now described as a Russian intelligence officer. And Manafort repeatedly shared internal campaign information with Kilimnik. As Mother Jones writes, Manafort passed inside info from the Trump campaign to Kilimnik. Kilimnik gave it to Russian intelligence, which at the time was mounting a covert attack on the 2016 election to thwart Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump. That's collusion. Now, it isn't the cartoonish scenarios that some dreamed up. Trump secretly meeting with Putin personally. But it is Trump's campaign chairman scheming with a Russian intelligence officer as Russia was publishing derogatory information about Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton, and preferred Trump over Hillary. We don't have to get all dramatic. We don't have to get hyperbolic. They were working together. That's it. It's simple. Meanwhile, At the same time, Kilimnik was trying to use Paul Manafort and through him use Trump to advance Vladimir Putin's interests related to Ukraine. This isn't unique. Many countries try to do this. Many of them just aren't as good as Russia at doing it. And many countries don't have someone as vulnerable and naive and ignorant as Donald Trump and the people that Donald Trump put around him. And it really went both ways. So for those who will react to this with like an okay, so what type of approach, imagine for a moment that it was revealed today, for example. This hasn't happened, but imagine we learned today Joe Biden's campaign manager was in regular contact with Chinese intelligence officers throughout the 2020 election, including unreported meetings, passing internal Biden data and strategy to Chinese operatives, who, by the way, were working on a campaign to hurt Donald Trump. How do you think people would be reacting right now? Fox News would be calling for the removal and imprisonment of treasonous traitor Joe Biden, period. And then also remember that the Mueller report basically said the same things as the Treasury report that we now have. It used different language, but just before the Mueller report was released, Donald Trump's hatchet man attorney general, William Barr, put out that 4-page propaganda letter claiming to summarize what was in the Mueller report, but not actually summarizing it, coming up with a completely different, non-actually empirically based assessment of what was in the report. So that led to the nationwide bogus exoneration tour that Donald Trump went on, and the rest is sort of history. So that's the latest. It's not really a surprise to anyone who has been paying attention, and it will be ignored by those who are convinced there was never anything there. But I think that people who followed the story soberly and closely from the beginning would not be shocked, nor would we think that it would be out of line with what was going on at the time to get this report from the Treasury Department. We've talked before about how the post-Trump Dr. Anthony Fauci is sort of a new Dr. Fauci, who both feels that the pandemic is being managed more competently and feels that he can simply stick to medical advice without having to kind of calculate what he says from the standpoint of whether the administration will like it or won't they like it. That's a different Dr. Fauci than we saw during the Trump administration. And Dr. Fauci was interviewed yesterday on CNN and went right at one of the most notable, it's not even really a hypocrisy, it's really a contradiction by the American right wing on the pandemic. They want everything to be over, but they refuse to do the things that will accelerate the end of the pandemic. They want to go back to normal, but they couldn't even avoid bars and big parties for a few months in 2020. And of course, they're saying open everything now. It's time to end everything from a social perspective, but now they don't want to get vaccinated. I told you last week, 43% of Republicans say they don't want the vaccine and they don't plan to get it unless for some reason they have no choice. So Dr. Fauci was asked about it yesterday on CNN. He calls it like it is. He explains that the people who most claim to want everything to be over are actually making it go longer by their opposition to the vaccine and their other actions. Take a look.
A new poll this week shows that 43% of Republicans still don't want to get the vaccine. How frustrating is this for you, Dr. Fauci?
You know, Dana, it is quite frustrating because the fact that one may not want to get vaccinated, in this case, a disturbingly large proportion of Republicans, only actually works against where they want to be. They want to be able to say these restrictions that are put on by public health recommendations are things that they're very concerned about. We're all concerned about that. We share that concern. But the way you get rid of those restrictions is to get as many people vaccinated as quickly and as expeditiously as possible, because when that happens, for absolutely certain, you're going to see the level of virus in the community go down and down and down to the point where you would not have to have those public health restrictions. So it's almost paradoxical that on the one hand, they want to be relieved of the restrictions, but on the other hand, they don't want to get vaccinated. It just almost doesn't make any sense.
Paradoxical is exactly the right word to apply to this situation. Now, it's also hopeless for Dr. Fauci to expect these very people to go and get the vaccine. Dr. Fauci wants the people who are against abortion but don't want easier access to contraception to realize that they could end the pandemic sooner if they got vaccinated. And this exists a ton on the right. We are against abortion no matter what. Okay, great. Well, let's reduce demand for abortions. To do that, we prevent unwanted pregnancy. Well, what prevents unwanted pregnancy? Access to contraception, comprehensive sex ed. Oh, but they're also against that. What? It's the exact same thing. Dr. Fauci said it almost doesn't make any sense. I would remove the word almost. It just doesn't make any sense. And very little, we're going to talk later about this actually, very little of the modern Republican Party makes any sense. It's not just their position on ending the pandemic. If you want to talk about other things that make no sense, consider the big picture on vaccines from these people. The virus isn't serious. It's just like the flu. So everything can stay open. But Trump is developing a vaccine, which he deserves credit for, which they're not going to take anyway. But he'd better get the credit for it, even though we don't need it. And they won't take it, and the pandemic's not serious anyway. Well, then hold on a second. Then why is it that Trump's a hero for developing the vaccine you won't take and don't need? And by the way, what is pro-life about their positions on any of these things? They don't want to get the vaccine nor wear a mask, but they want to end the pandemic. Our patience for this nonsense should be very, very low. And I've said this before, and it's maybe a good point to end on. Rights come with responsibilities. I have an entire YouTube segment about this that you can find. To just go around demanding rights, absent and completely ignoring the responsibilities that come with them, is not a recipe for a well-functioning society. And unfortunately, we're going to have to go around them or through them in order to fix this situation. They're not going to work with us. And that's maybe the worst part of all of it, because people who are doing the right things are still going to suffer. Let me know your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at @Pakman. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21. All one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. Remember that the David Pakman Show is a viewer and listener supported program. You can support it by grabbing a membership at joinpakman.com. We do have, I guess, what we're calling good news regarding the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Dr. Anthony Fauci says that he believes the U.S. is going to resume use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for coronavirus by the end of the week, maybe with some kind of warning or restriction attached. You might remember we covered last Tuesday that regulators said temporarily pause use of the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There were 6 cases of rare brain blood clots, all in women age 18 to 48. I believe as of right now that one of those women died. This is out of about 7 million Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses that were given. And Dr. Fauci says he's expecting a decision on that vaccine maybe by this Friday, and that the most likely outcome, he seems confident that there will be a resumption of the use of that vaccine. You will again, remember that this was within 13 days of receiving the shot. Women age 18 to 48 who developed these symptoms, the FDA decided to put a pause out of, quote, an abundance of caution. And unfortunately, you know, this is one of those things that what's tough about it is that it will create certainly some additional anti-vax sentiment and provide fuel for the anti-vaccine crowd, even if it is not warranted. And it's one of these things where you really have to think of the numbers big picture. That vaccine has been given to more than 7 million people. There have been 6 or 7 blood clots reported, and one of those people died. And when you first of all, when you compare that to the death rate of getting the virus itself, that's important context to have and to provide. The other reality is, you know, if you wanted to be really careful with this and this is, I think, what Dr. Fauci is kind of alluding to, or maybe what's being considered by regulators. It was all women 18 to 48. What if you say, well, maybe you don't give this vaccine to women 18 to 48? The other factor, and I mentioned this last week, and there's some early suggestions, but it's still being investigated, that there may be a medicine interaction that is common to the individuals that experience this, the 6 or 7 women that experienced the blood clotting. If it were determined that there's a specific interaction between a medication that these women were on and the vaccine, that would even be further reassuring. You could figure out exactly who it is that should not receive this vaccine. And that's something that is increasingly being looked at. There was a bit of a slowdown over the weekend in terms of vaccine doses. And in fact, I'm pulling up the numbers myself, although it's not clear that it's related to the Johnson & Johnson decision. If you look at the numbers from over the weekend, there was a bit of a slowdown in the number of doses given. There are reports that this may be because of what's called demand slackening a little bit. There was just a little bit of a downturn. If you go back to about April 11th and look at the last 8 days, the average number of doses has gone down. Now, part of it reasonably would be because of the J&J pause. But there are reports that some states where there's less interest in the vaccine, places like the example we've been looking at is Mississippi, we may actually be at the point where there is more supply and ability to give the vaccine than there is demand. And what's going to have to be figured out is, will vaccines start to be shifted from states where there is less demand to states where there is more demand? I believe Vermont and Massachusetts both at the top with 92% of the population wanting the vaccine. Is that even possible? Is it a recipe for disaster, starting to move vaccines around? Instead, will the focus be just on a campaign to make people want the vaccine? Yesterday, we saw Joe Biden and Barack Obama participate in an event talking about the vaccine, encouraging people to get it. I don't know the answer, but it seems as though today, which is the day where everybody becomes eligible, we are starting to see a slackening of demand. Hopefully, full eligibility starting today will bring a bunch of new demand, and maybe we can get up to even 4 million doses a day. Remains to be seen. J&J, though, expected to come back online possibly as soon as Friday. Last week, I received an email from a right-wing viewer saying, David, you cite these high approval ratings that Joe Biden supposedly has, but every time I look at Joe Biden's live streams on YouTube, it has thousands of dislikes. How could Joe Biden really be that popular if he has so many dislikes on YouTube? Now, of course, this is very much like the people who were saying in 2020 during the Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders is so much more popular than Joe Biden on Twitter, and he's so much more popular on Reddit. How could Bernie Sanders possibly lose? And as we quickly learned in 2020, Twitter retweets, Reddit upvotes, and Facebook likes and dislikes, and YouTube likes and dislikes, it's not the real world. We do actually have, however, real world polling data about Joe Biden's presidency so far. And as Joe Biden is approaching 100 days in office, his approval at this point is surpassing George W. Bush's, Bill Clinton's, George H.W. Bush's by a tiny bit, basically a tie, and by a huge margin, Donald Trump's approval at this point in time. This is new data from the Pew Research Center, which has Joe Biden right now at 59% approval. At this point in Donald Trump's presidency, Trump was polling 39%. It's a 20-point gap. It's not even close. And remember that Donald Trump never even hit 50% approval for a single day during his presidency. Barack Obama was slightly better than Biden at 61% within the margin of error. George W. Bush was at 55. Bill Clinton was at just 49. George H.W. Bush basically within the margin of error at 58. And we have in the first April of Ronald Reagan's presidency, Reagan polled the highest at 67%. How could this be? How could Joe Biden be polling so well despite, again, dislikes on his YouTube live streams? Because the internet is not real life. Most working people are not taking time out of their day to dislike a Joe Biden live stream on YouTube in order to make Biden look bad. They're working. And then they're looking at, did he do COVID stimulus? What's going on with vaccination? And in fact, when you ask the question, where is the approval coming from? It's coming from the same places as in February and March. Joe Biden has 72% approval on managing vaccine distribution. Joe Biden has 55% approval among Republicans on vaccine distribution. Biden has stronger approval than Trump in terms of, is he behaving in a way that is appropriate for a president of the United States to behave? And the $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package, which every Republican in the House and Senate voted against, is popular with 2/3 of the country, either strongly or somewhat approving of the COVID stimulus. That is a big deal. You don't get to 67% with just Democrats. And remember that that's not a single one of these Republican elected officials in the House or in the Senate voted for the bill. Now, in terms of the next few months, if the vaccine rollout continues, if cases resume a downward trend, if things go the way that the highly vaccinated countries like Israel and the UK are seeing things go, cases plunging, deaths plunging, things opening, this could actually turn around for Joe Biden for the worse. And you might be saying, well, hold on, if things keep improving, how could it get worse for Joe Biden? And this is why. Republicans and right-wing media have done one thing. I don't want to say they've done it well, but they've done it successfully from their point of view. Fox News and Newsmax and other right-wing media, in coordination with Republican elected officials, have successfully turned attention to immigration. And when Pew asked people, what are the big problems right now in the United States? The number of Americans now saying immigration, illegal immigration, is a big problem, has gone from just 28% in June up to 48% this month. That's a 20 percentage point jump, and that is potentially huge. They realize, this is Republicans now in right-wing media, they realize Biden is doing well on COVID, Biden's doing well on vaccines, Biden got a popular stimulus bill done with no Republican support. So they are taking the approach of pointing to something else, the manufactured crisis at the border, and it is actually working. So this is the potential challenge ahead for Joe Biden. And the truth is that no matter what he does, Republicans will say he's failing on immigration. This is what Republicans do to Democrats. No matter what Democrats do on guns, Republicans say Democrats are trying to take your guns. And no matter what Democrats do on immigration, Republicans say Democrats are welcoming dangerous illegals into the country. And this is going to be a test for Biden, and we will see what he can do with it. And it's sort of it's a problem of Biden's own making. It's not an avoidable one, but the better he does on the pandemic and the more quickly his management of vaccination helps us get out of the pandemic, the more of an opportunity there is for people to take their eye off that ball and to have their attention focused on whatever else Republicans are pointing to. And right now, that's illegal immigration. They have nothing else that's even remotely policy-oriented. Of course, they're lying about what's going on, as we've covered before, but it doesn't matter. It's working, and we see it in the polling data. So this will be a challenge for Joe Biden. The better he does on the pandemic, the more he's going to have to deal with this. And we know what the right-wing playbook is. We saw it with Bill Clinton. We saw it under Barack Obama. The playbook is the same one. It's an effective playbook. That's why they keep going back to it. We will have more on this story and this polling data for you on the David Pakman Show Instagram page. You can find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. And while you are there, find me on Instagram at david.pakman, both rapidly approaching 100,000 followers on the Instagram platform. The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show. The degree to which faux populist rhetoric and the propagandistic nature of Tucker Carlson's Fox News program has completely bamboozled a huge portion of the American right wing and even some on the left is really an important issue to be explored. There are even people who are already talking about Tucker Carlson for Republican presidential nominee in 2024. And based on just how easily people are falling for Tucker's nonsense, it does not bode well for the United States in the sense that it's clear Tucker is able to put together propaganda and disinformation that is really effective in the current marketplace of ideas and ignorance and a complete absence of thought on the American right. And one of the reasons that Tucker Carlson is so effective is that he is sort of the anti-intellectual's pseudo-intellectual. And what I mean by that is Tucker Carlson has a way of talking to people that don't understand anything or know anything, which makes him seem like a really smart, enlightened, and even borderline intellectual guy. And the reason it works is that when Tucker puts out some idea about economics, sociology, people who watch it have never studied those areas before. They have no frame of reference for comparison. And so Tucker sounds convincing and they fall for it. Whereas a more informed person would hear Tucker and say, you know, the things Tucker is opining about are completely outside of his area of expertise. They've already been widely studied. Tucker's ideas are half-baked and ignorant. And we already know about all of these things Tucker is merely, quote, asking questions about. So here's one example to really make it more tangible for you. This is from a recent Tucker episode on Fox News. And in this one, Tucker starts putting out the idea that, changes to societies are really, really bad. And it's all fundamentally rooted in Tucker Carlson's anti-immigration nationalist ideas, which he masks as a populist rhetoric. People are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. So let's dive in and think through some of what's being said.
If you're over 40, you may have trouble recognizing your own country. It's just too unfamiliar. Now, the self-righteous children on social media don't care to notice this, and when they do, they dismiss it, any complaint about change, as bigotry. But it's not bigotry. It's human nature. Abrupt change causes social chaos, always.
So there are like 4 or 5 different things there that are pretty nonsensical, but they're all thrown together and people fall for it. He says people over 40 might not recognize this country anymore. He says abrupt change causes social chaos. The reality is that there isn't much abrupt change happening of the type that Tucker is describing. It's really common as a trope for the reactionary right to say, things are changing too quickly and it's for the worse. We're losing control of what we used to have, which was better, and we are quickly on some kind of ramp to something much worse. The reality is that the country today is different than it was in the 90s, which was much different than during the 60s and 70s, which had already changed significantly from the supposed conservative golden era of the 1950s, which was already different than the sort of pre and during World War II era, where there were big changes relative to the time between the 2 world wars, which was already different from what the country looked like before World War I. And then before that, you're in the late 1800s where things were really different. We were pre-car, we were pre-aviation, we were in the Industrial Revolution. Things are always changing. And there's always guys like Tucker screaming that the change is too quick and it's bad, and we're quickly going down in flames, and it's ripping apart the fabric of the country. Now, it is true that most human societies, let me put it a different way, many human societies have failed, but for different reasons. And America may fail, and I'm going to get back to that, but Tucker's refrain is a tired old refrain that at this point is just boring to anyone who has studied the rise and fall of societies and civilizations. But we'll get back to that. Let's look at another clip.
Human beings develop customs and habits and generational expectations for a reason. It's not random. Continuity is comforting to people. If you eliminate familiar things overnight, societies fracture. Populations tend to explode. We've seen that happen. The last industrial revolution, in the end, provoked armed revolutions. Hundreds of millions of people died. Germany got Hitler. Eastern Europe got Stalinism. Yes, we did wind up with antibiotics in the end. You could thank technology for that, and we do. but we also got genocide and atomic bombs.
This is absolutely bonkers. This is so off the wall that it's actually hard to even know how to start picking it apart because it just makes no sense. Tucker's throwing things together there that are barely related. And here's the thing, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the segment. There are lots of people watching Tucker who simply have never thought about these topics in these terms. It's similar to when a college freshman that has never been exposed to any economics goes to Micro 101. And suddenly they are neoclassical economics believers. They believe that neoclassical standard economics is that it's all there is. It's right. That's it. Then, though, you start to learn about other economic theory. You read some behavioral economics, you read some Marx, you get a wider view, and then you come to realize, well, the first thing I heard isn't always or necessarily correct. On this issue, you would be vaccinated, for lack of a better term, against Tucker's nonsense if you had previously read some of this stuff. For example, the work of Jared Diamond. This is not dense academic stuff. Jared Diamond's work on why societies fail or succeed is very accessible. And if you were familiar with that, just that, and of course there's dozens, hundreds of other things, that would have insulated you, where you would hear Tucker say this and you would say, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. The arguments he's making are not based in historical fact. They're not based in anything other than Tucker's wishes as to what he wants the United States to look like. This is just one example. But you would then not be falling for just any old thing Tucker says about societal change and what hurts or helps a culture. You would be protected because you would have some knowledge from actual experts on this issue. Let's watch a little more of the clip.
There's a lesson here. If you're going to change things, go slowly. Choose the incremental over the immediate. Explain yourself as you do it. Reassure people. Acknowledge the reality of evolutionary biology. It is real. Human beings are not born to be machine components. You can't just bang out improved versions of your citizens on a 3D printer. People in real life are complicated and stubborn and hard to control. Even the most open-minded ones get jumpy when suddenly everything's different.
The truth is, just about everything is changing incrementally. It's not really changing rapidly. I mean, sociologist Tucker Carlson is feeding you drivel here. Look at healthcare. Look at how slowly it has changed. It took basically 20 years to get the Affordable Care Act. Remember, the Affordable Care Act, under a different name and put together by different people, was first floated in the early 90s. It took basically 20 years to get that. And that is a relatively modest change to the system. Look at societal views on gay marriage, which shifted so slowly over decades. Legalization in a few states, then eventually full legalization in 2015. We are only now getting to the point where more than half the country supports gay marriage, thanks to some more Republicans getting on board. So the change has been slow by modern standards. It is true that humanity in the last 500 years has changed very quickly compared to the slow evolution of Homo sapiens over millions of years. But Tucker's not talking about that in a global sense. He's talking about cultural norms in the United States. Here's the last piece of the segment.
Obviously, and you'd think it would be obvious, wise leaders would know that intuitively. If you're going to have relentless technological change, and apparently we are, you cannot inflict relentless social change and expect your society to survive. Things will fall apart if you do that. That's guaranteed. Yet that is exactly what our leaders are currently doing. They're changing everything, whether we like it or not. A new language, new values, new biology, new curricula, new social mores and hiring standards and body types. A brand new national population.
Okay, so, this is the type of rant that leads conservatism into the ideology of preserve society as it is, merely because change is scary and we assume bad. And short of that, Tucker says the new technology is mostly good, but don't change society along with it. And that also makes no sense. Anybody who has read about technological change, and here, again, very accessible, I'm going off the top of my head, look at the work of Max Tegmark, look at the work of Bill Bryson, and, I'm kind of blanking here, but there's so much accessible stuff on this issue. How could you have the technological acceleration that Tucker seems to say is good, but have no societal change either? That also is completely ahistorical. In fact, I just finished reading Cal Newport's new book, A World Without Email, where he talks about how because of email, a lot of jobs have become 30, 40, 50, 60% just managing an email inbox rather than doing the work that's sort of core to what you do. But one of the interesting things that Cal Newport talks about is that email wasn't just you have work and office culture, and then in comes email, and now you have the same work and office culture plus email. It doesn't work that way. Email actually changed in significant ways over a period of 30 years, work culture and office culture and the nature of work. You can't have just you drop in a technological change and nothing changes, but Tucker wants you to believe the change is out of control and it's for the worst, and it could be the downfall of society. And this is what people have been saying for hundreds of years in the US. The Industrial Revolution was going to be it, cars, airplanes, women voting, whatever example you want to find, you can find it. And it's really one of the best examples, this clip we looked at, of what Tucker does so well, but it only works effectively on an ignorant audience that has no frame of reference on these issues. There's another new problem for the Republican Party, which is that college-educated voters are abandoning the party quite quickly to a degree that I didn't even realize. Check out this report from MSNBC about recent polling.
Welcome back. Data download time. We've talked a lot here about how the two political parties are changing, and now there are new warning signs for the Republicans in that realignment. In the first quarter of this year, Gallup found that Democrats have a 9-point edge in party identification. It's the largest gap Gallup's recorded in a decade. And now we've seen this before, and it hasn't always stuck. That said, data from the Pew Research Center shows that the shift of college-educated voters from red to blue could indeed have long-term consequences. And here's why. At the beginning of this century, Republicans held an 11-point edge among this group of voters. By the time Barack Obama was president, the figures had flipped and had become a narrow 4-point edge for the Democrats. Then along came President Trump, and as he was winding down, Democrats had a whopping 13-point lead among this group of voters. Now, here's why this matters. Because Republicans have long counted on the high turnout rates of college-educated suburban voters, especially during midterm and special elections. And yet, in 2018, 64% of people with a bachelor's degree went to the polls. And watch this. That compares with 52% of those with just some college or an associate's degree. It's 39% among those high school or less. And it's only 20% for those without a high school diploma. All of this could spell trouble for Republicans if they are losing the most reliable voters to Democrats. We actually may have seen that already in Georgia and in a statewide election in Wisconsin.
When more and more people are getting college degrees, how do you win when you have a 13-point deficit among the college-educated voters? Or to put it another way, college-educated people are more likely to vote, and increasingly more people are going to college, and increasingly those people are going to vote for Democrats. That's a recipe for disaster for the Republican Party. Now, a common sense reaction, if you're the Republican Party, would be, well, let's figure out why college-educated voters are abandoning us, and let's fix that issue. But that's not the approach of the Republican Party. The Republican approach instead has been, let's trash going to college as liberal nonsense, so maybe fewer people will go. And meanwhile, let's make it harder to vote in areas we've identified as being more Democratic leaning. And that strategy, it can work in theory, at least in the short run. It can also fail. Arguably, it failed in 2020 in places like Georgia. But I don't see how the strategy works long term. This is a stunning trend. And as Chuck Todd pointed out in that segment, the Republican Party used to lead among college-educated voters. Then in the Obama era, Obama was like +4 among college-educated voters. Now Democrats are +13. Some of you may be surprised that college-educated voters ever voted for Republicans, but remember that there was a time when relatively fewer people went to college. Those that did made more money. Therefore, they paid more in taxes, and arguably they would develop some animosity to the party of higher taxes, and they shifted to the right. Since then, though, the Republican Party, although it is anti-tax, has become also a lot of other crazy things: anti-science, anti-life, anti-common sense, and the tax thing no longer seems to be the controlling factor. You can put it a different way also. The Republican Party has gone so far off the deep end that they are even starting to lose the people who want low taxes. And since Ronald Reagan, as I've told you many times, the Republican Party has been creating this environment in which someone like Trump can win. They've done it relatively successfully, winning a bunch of elections. But when Trump actually came in, he blew everything up and maybe it was too far. They now have a policy where they have a party where policy essentially doesn't matter. It's just rhetoric. It's owning the libs. It's, arguing that you want to bring guns onto the House floor. And as a result, they lost the House in 2018. They lost the Senate in 2020. They lost the White House in 2020. So they are left with almost nothing. That is the vacuum into which Fox and Tucker and Newsmax and these types, Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they can fill the void with their outrageous rhetoric, which further radicalizes the party, but it's not dealing with policy. Can they turn it around? Sure, they can. I mean, I've looked at deeper and more detailed opinion surveys trying to figure out what is it that would bring college-educated voters back to the Republican Party. If the country became more religious, would that do it? Unclear. And remember that the country is becoming less religious. On issues, the country is also moving left. Abortion being legal in most cases has the biggest support it's had since Roe v. Wade. I mentioned earlier, gay marriage being legal has more support today than at any day in American history. Inequality being too high and being bad for the country is something that more people today agree with than at any time in the past. So on the religiosity thing, things aren't turning back to the right. On the issues, things aren't turning to the right. This is why the Republican Party has adopted a strategy of voter suppression, trying to steal elections rather than to win them. And when you see this polling, it does make sense. It does make, if you realize we can't seem to win on issues, the issues we used to win on are increasingly going against us. In that sense, you would try to just win in other ways, and that's exactly what they're doing. We'll take a quick break. We have much more after this. Find me. This is very exciting. I've not been this excited about a new platform in a long time. Find me on BitClout, where we have Pakman coin. I know it sounds nuts, but it's very interesting. Go to davidpakman.com/BitClout. That's BITCLOUT. At minimum, follow me there. We're going to have some very interesting things there. But if you're in that space, I think you'll find the platform really interesting. Quick break, right back after this. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show and on Twitter at David Pakman Show. And if you want to reach me directly, no trolling allowed, follow me on Twitter at dpakman. Hope to hear from you soon. So I don't really even know what to make of this, but radical, deranged, delusional, fantasy world, religious televangelist Pat Robertson, of course known from the 700 Club, which has been around for decades at this point, he did a mostly accurate and pretty sober and precise assessment of police killings, including specifically of the killing in Minnesota of Dante Wright. It's almost, I'm kind of joking here, it's almost like Pat Robertson became woke. And I'm joking because I don't actually use that term. But check out this video, Pat Robertson's co-host pointing out the entire taser versus gun confusion that's being claimed is a terrible explanation for the officer involved in the shooting. Tasers and guns are kept on opposite sides of police utility belts. Guns and tasers feel totally different. And then Pat Robertson, I venture to say here, delivers an impassioned statement about the issue facing our country. Check this out, talking about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, the Dante Wright shooting, police, and more. I don't know. It's Pat Robertson. Take a look.
Also, I want to say, I think a lot of people are thinking like I was, that both the gun and the taser would be put on your dominant side, but it's not that way.
They have to cross where they have them different.
So you actually have to reach across yourself to
you
get
feel the difference. I mean,
it's definitely
there's just no
discernible
comparison. As I say, they're not making tasers in this yellow color anymore. They're making in black. They're making them yellow. Now, how she made the difference was she shot that poor guy to death, saying, "This is what I thought. I thought was my taser." And if you can't tell the difference in the feel of those things, it's crazy. Anyhow, she deserves. But I am pro-police, folks. I think we need the police. We need their servants, and they do a good job. But if they don't stop this onslaught, they cannot do this. You know, the police in Virginia picked up a lieutenant in the Army and began to give him trouble. And our state police are highly trained. But why they don't stop this? And this thing is going on in Minnesota, but the Derek Chauvin, I mean, they ought to put him under the jail. He has caused so much trouble by kneeling on the death of George Floyd. It's just, I mean, on his neck. It's just terrible what's happening. And the police, why don't they open their eyes to what the public relations are? They've got to stop this stuff.
So there is Pat Robertson at the age of 91 years coming across a good take. Somehow it happened. Now, you know, okay, some of what Pat Robertson is saying seems to be that lots of this stuff just makes police look bad versus it's actually bad. That I understand that maybe there's an aspect of that here. I've never seen anything like this from Pat Robertson. Now, this doesn't make Pat Robertson a progressive beacon of hope. But as he pointed out, even Pat Robertson seems to realize that the situation in the country has become completely absurd. There's an opposite interpretation as well. If Pat Robertson is actually able to see this situation for what it is, doesn't it make it more likely that he realizes all of the other stuff he's saying is bogus, but he says it anyway in order to get donations or clicks or ratings or to placate his right-wing religious audience? I don't know. The other thing is there are some instances in Pat Robertson's past where he'll say something kind of logical and then there will be blowback and then he'll just backtrack a week later. I think this happened once with cannabis legalization where he said something that was pretty logical. His audience went nuts. And next thing we knew, he had basically recanted his view. But I do think that the one maybe consistent takeaway is that there are lots of people who, when they're able to separate themselves from their partisanship and their tribalism, they realize at a deep gut level, what's going on with guns and or with police shootings is not okay. They get it. Then very often, after they have the gut reaction, they turn on Fox News or whatever, and they realize, oh, there's partisan talking points I have to get in line with. But there's like this brief moment of clarity that they seem to have. Then the NRA comes in and they say, no, this is evidence we need more guns. Police should have more guns and people should have more guns and they should be easier to buy. And then they mostly fall in line. But many of these people, I think for a moment, get it. Anyway, no need to now start praising Pat Robertson more than he deserves, but it's an interesting segment. Certainly not something I was expecting to see. And maybe there's like some glimmer of hope here that there's maybe an opportunity to get consensus on the issue of guns and police if we can separate people from their reflexive partisan reactions. And that's not easy. There's a reason that if you go back to the Sandy Hook shooting, which was, what was that, 2012? It's insane that it's been almost a decade. If so, you go back to the Sandy Hook shooting, and you had an 88 to 90% approval rating from the country saying we need 100% universal background checks. It didn't happen. Even with that level of agreement, it didn't happen. And we have almost nothing in this country where you have 88 to 90% agreement. But people had the gut reaction. Wait a second. There are some gun transactions where you don't need a background check. That doesn't make sense at a fundamental level. Then in came the NRA. In came the Republican politicians. And nothing got done. So maybe the takeaway here is not Pat Robertson, beacon of woke or beacon of hope or whatever, but that there's an opportunity there, brief as it may be, where there may be more agreement on these issues than it sometimes seems. Hey, this is really interesting news out of Texas. Actor Matthew McConaughey, or McConaughey, as some people like to say, is polling 12 points ahead of Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He's not running. If your reaction was, I didn't know that he was running, he's not. This is a new poll from the Dallas Morning News and the University of Texas Tyler. It's based on 1,100 registered voters, 30% Democrats, 37% Republicans, 33% who are neither. 45% of voters say they would support Matthew McConaughey over Greg Abbott if Matthew McConaughey were to run for governor. 33% said they'd support Abbott over McConaughey. 22% say they would vote for someone else or aren't really sure. This is interesting because McConaughey has actually kind of teased and alluded to maybe running in the state of Texas. He is not confirmed. He told CNBC last month, he is not joking. He said, quote, "I'm not teasing the idea. I'm actually looking at the idea and giving it serious consideration. I have a new chapter for myself personally in my life. I believe it's some sort of leadership role. I don't know what the role is. I don't know my category. We've been talking about the why of leadership, and even, I would say, we need some more good leaders." This would be fascinating. So there's two parts to this. I don't know how much this says about Matthew McConaughey specifically. What I mean by that is Greg Abbott has so mismanaged almost everything. I mean, the pandemic, the power outage and grid, electrical grid situation. He's a complete and total clown who doesn't seem to care much about the health or safety or welfare of people in Texas. It's possible a random school teacher with no name recognition would maybe do okay against Greg Abbott. So part of it is we have to figure out how much of it is Matthew McConaughey specifically. But then you add in the fact that if you look at Matthew McConaughey over the last 12 to 18 months, I've been seeing him doing more and more conversations and interviews with people in the political space. He does actually seem interested. He seems to be taking this seriously. I don't know the guy's politics. I have no idea whether he's a Democrat or a Republican. I don't know anything about him. What I do know, though, is that he at least doesn't seem like a radical right-winger. If he is a centrist or further left, and if without even announcing a candidacy, he is doing this well in Texas, what we saw in 2020 in Texas, the tightening in Texas for Trump in his reelection campaign, which ultimately didn't end up being that close, but it could have been a much bigger margin for Donald Trump. This could signal significant changes in the state of Texas, and all we can do is continue to follow it. We've been talking about it before. Georgia and Texas have been the ones that we've been watching relatively closely. Very interesting, and we're going to keep a close eye on that. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I can't tell fully if this voicemail is anti-transgender or sort of neutral, or what the caller is exactly talking about. So I want to play it and listen to it together with you. Let's see if we can figure this out.
Hi, David. My name is Ashley. I wanted to talk about the transgenders. I think it doesn't take a genius to realize that when you put a bunch of people who are from different backgrounds and different ethnicities together, you're going to end up with some people that are kind of confusing.
So I'm noticing the constant upspeak. That's not really bothering me. It's more, the transgenders. It's already kind of weird.
And I don't necessarily think it's about gender. I just think it's like you just have different looking people that you're not used to seeing. And I guess this draws like a lot of conclusions, but I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that when you're born a woman with a vagina, that means you're a woman for life. And that when you're a man, when you're born with a penis, you're a dude for life. I don't think it takes a genius.
Okay, so it's seeming anti-trans, right?
To figure that out. And if there's some weird complications, it's probably because of a cultural difference. And I just think this is complete
What does complication mean? I don't even know what they're saying.
bullshit, and these people are really ignorant.
Which people? That's a weird voicemail, right? Help me parse that out and figure out what it's all about. I don't really understand what's going on there. We have a great, it doesn't sound good though. Let me put it that way. It doesn't sound particularly enlightened or sensitive. We have a great bonus show for you today. We will be talking about the America First caucus, which lasted one day. It involves Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it lasted one day. Massachusetts also doing some very interesting new climate law that, if it all goes as planned, will zero out carbon pollution for the state. Very, very aggressive and forward-looking. And we will also look at what seems to be Senate Democrats settling on a 25% corporate tax rate for Joe Biden's changes to the tax plan. Remember, it was 35% previously. Trump dropped it to 21. Joe Biden was looking at raising to 28, and it looks as though Senate Democrats are okay with 25. What I want to talk about is whether this even matters. And some of you who have heard me talk about the corporate tax rate before probably already know where I'm going. That's on today's bonus show. Okay, get instant access to the bonus show by signing up at joinpakman.com. We have a coupon code. The coupon code is BETTER21. And very exciting, follow me on BitClout. I rarely am excited about new platforms. I'm very excited about this one. I spent the weekend checking it out. Go to davidpakman.com/BitClout, BITCLOUT. Follow me there at minimum. Check out how it works. I'll have more about it later in the week.